My name is Allison Lambroza. I'm the head of advertising sales at Tripadvisor. I oversee our brand partnerships team. I'm sure many of you have used Tripadvisor before for your personal travel and dining decisions, but we are the largest platform for travel guidance. My role is connecting brands with our high intent audience in unique ways, rooted in data, from everything to custom solutions. I've had the pleasure to meet with Rose this week prior to live cast today. So I'm really excited about this conversation. Rose has a really incredible background, has worked on some of mine, and I'm sure some of your most beloved brands. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rose to kick us off, as I know we'd all love to hear a bit more about her background and her career journey to get us started today.
Thanks. Yeah, hi guys. So I can give you a quick kind of career journey, if you will. So I've worked in media / marketing my entire career. As soon as I graduated college, I moved to Los Angeles and started agency side on the media department at Universal McCann, with what I can still say to this day was a dream team of colleagues and clients. My client was Sony Pictures. And I'll never regret starting agency side. I kind of still to this day call it like career boot camp in the best way. But I knew pretty quickly that I wanted a seat at the strategy table a lot farther upstream than I thought agency life could get me. So after about 2 years, I actually ended up going client side to work at Sony Pictures. And I just felt like that was where I hit my stride. So I stayed there for about 5 years. I helped kind of build out a new digital analytics team. I got to work on so many fun movies and a few stinkers. And I was also there during the infamous Sony Pictures hack by North Korea, with my computer being kind of ground zero in the department that morning. So lots of fun stories there. And, I loved the company, and the team really became like a family, and I learned so much there, but I just kind of felt in my gut that it was time to explore something different at a new company, and it just was time to leave. So I ended up going over to Netflix, and I stayed there for 3 years, and I sort of still call it like what I think is the golden years of Netflix. It was kind of the beginning. It felt like the wild, wild west. It didn't really seem like you had a lot of people to answer to. They really trusted you as employees to be an adult, take risks, really lean in where you wanted and fight for things that you were passionate about. And so it was great. I, again, learned so much there, and I worked on all aspects of media versus just digital. So I was able to kind of expand that skill set too. And then after that, I rounded out my career in entertainment with a short stint at Stars. And I worked on the international media department there, kind of helping build a team and also launch Stars as a streaming platform in countries outside of the US. So another great kind of experience and skill set I was able to get there. So I left LA about 3.5 years ago, and now I'm in Chicago working at Constellation Brands in the beer division. And started here, when I started, the digital and traditional media teams were separate. So I started on digital, working on Casa Modelo and Corona family of brands. And then about 1.5 years ago, we merged together, became one team. And now I just work on the Corona family of brands. So that's a short, quick journey how I got here.
No, that's great. And I'm sure we 100% can unpack many of those stops along the way. One of the biggest things I saw is, you've had a decade in entertainment, and you really have pivoted to beverages in the beer category. What made you decide to get out of the entertainment world and into this category?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I just got burned out.
Honestly, it's good here.
Yeah, I got burned out. I mean, it's a really bizarre world, Hollywood, in the entertainment industry. I obviously loved it. I stayed for 10 years, but like everything is a fire drill, and everything is so sensitive because you've got filmmakers and actors to answer to, and who are also sensitive. And to be honest, I worked nonstop, 24/7. It felt like for the first probably 8 years of my career. And when I got to Stars, I kind of got this little taste of work-life balance that I just realized I wanted more of. And I think sometimes as women, it's hard to admit that because maybe it makes you seem weak if career isn't your everything, but that's not true. And, you're able to thrive in both life and work. And then there was the Harvey Weinstein scandal and Me Too movement, which just kind of pushed me over the edge. I think it was hard to ignore that side of Hollywood anymore. So anyway, all of that combined to just really wanting a change. And the one thing I did know is that I still wanted to work on a big beloved brand, already beloved, that had the scale, aka budget, to continue building like really fun campaigns and really be a driving part of culture versus just kind of fitting into culture, which I think Corona is that brand. And so it's been great. And Corona was actually my first sip of beer as a kid, so kind of stars aligned. But yeah,
perfect, full circle.
yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And I think you hit on a lot of points that resonate with a lot of people in terms of being able to just acknowledge the separation of work and life and being able to integrate and balance between the two. So, all right, big brand, big budget, you mentioned. I think the most obvious question as we're talking about like women in marketing is the overarching theme is that there are a handful of categories that are still traditionally male dominated in their marketing efforts. So beer being one of them. So one of the most like obvious questions is how do you think about like diversifying outside of beer? And are you currently having like a female effort that you're working on?
Yeah. I think there's a couple kind of areas to talk through here. I think in my career experience, marketing and specifically media has really been very female heavy. So, well, under the C-suite. So I've always felt really good about that. But, when it came to the beer industry, I noticed as a whole, it's an industry built by men and families of men and therefore leadership. And so there's a lot of layers there that companies are continuing to push against and that, and make diversity improvements on. And I've, been here 3 years now in this industry and I've seen it, right? Like there's women leaders in a lot of places that maybe hadn't been before. So, I think like we've made huge strides, I can tell, and there's also a long way to go. And I think that's okay. Like both can be true at the same time. Big changes don't happen overnight as long as you're kind of progressively moving in the right direction. But to specifically answer your question around messaging to women, we absolutely do. And how much we do and what that break is really just depends on the brand itself. I work on Corona family of brands and there's 5 sub brands under them. Corona Premier, I think, is a great example that has really pivoted to be inclusive of all genders. Golf, for example, is a big pillar of ours. And I think pre-pandemic, golf was very much a male sport. The women and wives of golfers were kind of almost like butts of jokes and stuff. But post-pandemic, the sport itself blew up and women are a huge part of that now. And I think we quickly pivoted and we're really inclusive. So that's a proud brand that and programming that I love to work on. Extra is the same. Like we've really embraced a lot more women ambassadors. A lot of our content creators and influencers that we work with are really in that female space, specifically bicultural females. And then Refresca, amazing campaign launch last year. If you guys haven't seen it, it's called Let Flavor Reign, and the team did such a good job building that out. And it really focuses on Black and Latina queens and flavor queens. So there's definitely areas where females are a bigger part, and then there's areas where we still have some improvements to make with our programming. But overall, yes, we absolutely focus on women.
No, I mean, I think that's great to hear, and we're seeing that shift. And I think there's been, I'm sure you've done a lot of it on your own, reams of research about the power of the female, purchaser. Do you think that's being understood from the top down in terms of where they're allocating efforts and, like we said before, some of the stereotypical ways in which we tend to see certain categories focus their budgets?
Yeah, it's definitely a good question. And I thought about this a lot. I don't think it's that people don't understand women and their purchasing power, but I just think that for big beer brands like men 21 to 49 it's a really safe space. I sometimes call it low-hanging fruit, but they contribute such a massive piece of volume to our business that of course it makes sense for us to kind of start there, saturate that demo, and then expand beyond to what some might see as maybe a less safe space because we haven't really been there before. Sometimes it's funny, I see some beer tropes sneak into other brands and out there, and beer is for men are bros love drinking beer and yelling at their TVs while drinking beer. And, that's not that common anymore. It is funny when you see it. And there's a place for that too, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely not as common. And one thing I was remembering is before I was in the industry, this was a long time ago, Coors did such a great campaign around the official beer of, and they really kind of broke that mold from how women showed up in beer commercials. Women used to kind of be side candy and just kind of there in the background. And they featured a woman front and center coming home from work after a long day. The first thing she did was take her bra off and grab a Coors and then sit on the couch. And I just remember as a consumer thinking, wow, that's like really different and also so relatable. And so obviously I didn't work there, so I don't know if it quote worked, but to me it did as a consumer.
I'm sure many of us are like, oh yeah, I understand.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, so we've come a long way, and I think it's not a novelty, but I think it just takes this conscious effort to sort of remind yourself to keep expanding and find that white space and lean into the power of women.
Yeah,
and their
absolutely.
power.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because you've been there, you said about 3.5 years now, right? So it's such an interesting time of what has occurred and habits that have changed in terms of consumption, trends that have come about. And I know we talked a little bit about the rise, and we could talk about it today as well, as non-alcoholic beverages have become, risingly more popular. So, how have you used your position to really rethink those audiences and messaging over this time frame in your 10 years there?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, right? Like consumption trends have changed, and I think we've all lived through the seltzer boom, which the seltzers, the light beers, they really leaned into women, this betterment, healthy lifestyle in a way that I think brands hadn't in the past. So there's actually products being made with women in mind now versus kind of marketing to them later. So that's been a huge change. I think in my position and the team I'm on, obviously I don't control the products we make, but I think for me, my MO is just to continue kind of like a broken record until I get some green lights. And kind of kidding there, but I try to just like, if I'm passionate about it, I keep talking about it. And then what I've found really helpful across my career is just really rooting a recommendation in 3 things that I found like kind of help set myself up for success. And so first, like really leading on current stats or behavioral shifts about the audience that you're trying to reach, if it's a new one that you're introducing. Competitive examples and wins are always helpful to see what people say about it and the sentiment behind that. And then positioning it as a test and learn or a first to market opportunity has really helped. And Constellation is a consumer obsessed company, which is so great. But the backdrop of everything we do is really built around like drinking occasions. And so it's about kind of finding and leaning into these occasions that maybe are broader, encompassing all demos, or honestly, even uncovering a new drinking occasion. Even if it's niche, it might be worth exploring and testing out. So right now, my focus is a lot on like future proofing our business. And I think some may roll their eyes at that, but I think like sometimes it's a hard sell, especially when your business is doing so well, which I realize is a great problem to have. But I think like humans can tend to sort of get in this, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So, but as marketers, we know you have to stay ahead of those trends so that when they get there, they're not too late. And I think outside of women, like Gen Z is one, like they're our next drinkers. And so we should absolutely be focusing on them now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I forget what the expression is, but if you don't change, you just stay still, like you're not evolving. And what we've seen so much is that things can change so quickly. So getting ahead of that. So, I don't think anyone's rolling their eyes at future proofing. I'm sure everyone is thinking about it themselves. So, I mean, I think those are really actionable advice areas to take away, which I know people a lot of times appreciate. I think we talk in these high levels, but to really boil it down into how can you internalize it and then action on it is really helpful. So I love taking us through that. Can you actually walk through again with like some of the examples, like how have you been championing these efforts for like more inclusive, whether it be age, gender, and where you were successful, maybe where you weren't, because I think some of the times we learn from the areas where we aren't able to push through as well more.
Yeah, for sure. Also lots of examples here, but I think one that really works for, again, the big beer brands is if we think about sports as a category, men's sports drives really consistent, strong live tune-in, which live is like the mecca right now, and the opportunities are few and far between. And if you look at a lot of beer brands, men's sports is truly a cornerstone of every either media plan or sponsorship or big bet. And I think it makes sense. It's an easy sell in. There's a lot of proof again that these tactics drive volume, so we should be there. But I think when you think about expanding to women's sports, like it has to be sort of a conscious decision that you make. And it might be a little scary to some because we haven't been able to prove out like that it drives volume in the way that the other live sports have. So but I think my team has really noticed, and not just my team, but there's so much life in women's sports and it's grown so much even just in the last few years. A couple of stats that we like to say are, 58% of women consider themselves avid or casual fans. So that's a huge base of people that are watching sports as well. And then this is a stat we sent around a few times last year, but the Women's March Madness finale in 2022 was the most watched college basketball game on ESPN, men or women, since 2008. So, I mean, it's just like, you can't really deny that it's just a huge piece right now of culture. And my little pod, the media team here we're all women, and we've kind of taken this on as kind of a passion point and really tried to sell through. And, example where we didn't was Women's March Madness this past year. We saw the rating trends, we saw them, like the social conversation around them. There were standout athletes, all of this, but and we wanted to buy in and we wanted to have a big space there. But ultimately, like, Men's March Madness is such a key tentpole moment for Corona family. And at the time, we'd already planned for it. So for a lot of reasons, like resources just didn't allow it, which made sense. It's not like there wasn't passion for it here, but so that didn't work. But we just kept pushing it. In kind of a funny way, we would like randomly send stats to our team and just be like, hey, did you see this? Hey, did you see that? And ultimately, like down the line, we ended up selling through a program around All-Star Week. So still getting into women's sports. We had an ambassador, Sue Bird, who was part of the Corona Extra campaign, and we really leaned on her to celebrate her career. She was retiring, and just kind of went out across a few sports lifestyle sites and were able to get in that way. So we're getting there. And then, Corona Premier, another brand, like I said, was super inclusive. Corona is the official cerveza of MLB, and we're building out a whole program for Premier and like women's day out at ballparks. So more to come there. But yeah, there's definitely lots of space, and sometimes you're successful selling in a new idea, and sometimes not.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you talked about as well when we were chatting, which I think is a really interesting viewpoint, is those areas where you are successful in selling it through, but maybe not as successful or didn't expect the outcomes maybe that you potentially received, and kind of how do you handle that in terms of managing that risk to leave doors for new opportunities open?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think taking a risk, whether you succeed or fail, is always worth it, because you can always learn something from it. And I think, there are times when you have to just take those baby steps, like that idea with sports. And like another one is I've been trying to kind of sell in a new way of thinking of social. And while you can't overhaul something for every single brand in the portfolio, you can take a step back and look at one brand that can be part of the test and learn. So kind of just trying to approach it and find those baby steps. But yeah, I mean, there have been things I've sold through with passion that ultimately failed. Got a few of those. And there are things that I was passionate about not doing, and I just didn't speak up enough. And I think that's also an interesting space to learn from. I do have kind of an example of that one that sticks with me from Netflix. I remember very vividly, we were launching season 2 of The Crown, which coincided perfectly with the election results, the Trump versus Hillary Clinton election. Very heated election. Everyone remembers it.
Bringing back memories, yes.
I know. But yeah, so I remember distinctly, we were sitting in this room, like cross-functional team, and we were having a risk assessment of a creative execution that we were going to run. So the idea was we were going to buy a full page wrap of the New York Times, and it was just going to be a beautiful picture of the Queen, and the tagline, which took up most of the space, was "Her reign begins." So obviously a nod to Hillary winning and a nod to the season, which covered the Queen ascending the throne for the first time. So in this room, like everyone was caught up in the genius of this idea, which it was. I mean, it's a perfect moment that you can't, create yourself. But the risk conversation was a lot about like the risk is super low because of course Hillary's going to win. Like, have you seen the polls? Have you seen the odds? People were quoting stats and this and that, and this is a slam dunk. And I just remember sitting there and finally, like, I raised my hand. I felt really uncomfortable doing it. But I was like, I don't think this is a slam dunk. And I said, I honestly think Trump is going to win this election. Oh my God, you could have heard a pin drop. It was so uncomfortable. And I was like, okay. So I just stayed quiet. I didn't like further expand on what I meant. And I wasn't like sharing my political beliefs. I just felt like I was in this unique position of living in the LA bubble, but also being very connected to the Texas bubble that I grew up in. So I just I never saw the election as a slam dunk. And anyway, Trump won. We tried to cancel it last minute. A few of them did go out. And it wasn't like a huge controversy. Some people definitely, thought it was distasteful, or like, headlines were written about it, but it wasn't a big deal at the end of the day. For me, my big takeaway and learning was that, just speak up, like, especially if you can back what you have with a reason, like, you're never going to be wrong in that. And I think you can learn a lot. And now anyone will tell you, I pretty much speak up all the time. But that I just thought was kind of a fun example for when it doesn't go your way.
No, it is. Listen, you have to, I think it's a hard lesson, especially earlier on in our careers, to trust your voice and to say it loudly. And don't apologize when you're saying it or couch it in anything. Be firm about it. No, I think it's a great example. And you talked a lot about, social and trends. And I know obviously that was probably a huge piece of your life from the entertainment category. Mm-hmm. So a little bit about, if you could talk through a little bit about like the learning curve and how you're trying to change a bit of the model that you're working on right now, not just from a who are we messaging, but how we're messaging.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think, the biggest learning curve I think I had when I came to AlcBev was that, unlike entertainment, beer is an always on kind of approach to marketing. And there was like one planning cycle, which I just thought, I've never done that. Like, one planning cycle for 365 days. I don't get it. But because in entertainment, everything's like a really short window. You've got like 1 to 3 months to get people to tune in. The day of is a big blast. Maybe you talk about it a week after, and then you're done and you move on. So a lot is changing and iterating every day because it's such a short window. So I think the biggest thing that I was passionate about when I got here was translating how we thought about digital marketing. Linear's a different story and a lot harder to kind of be flexible with, but digital isn't. And, the big things I focus on are agility, actually creating and amplifying tentpole moments, which hadn't been like a huge piece of the strategy before, and creating new content as they come. Like, we've got obviously our big production shoots for TV, but there's other things along the way and scrappy ways that you can build content and react that you can push against that sort of set it and forget it mindset, even though it, was obviously working, but it's just a different way to think. And then, like you said, consumer behaviors they're changing, and they're changing so fast now. And I think, we do that pre-COVID, but then March 2020 was honestly, it's like putting gas on the fire. So we quickly as a company learned the importance of having the resources and the process in place to be able to like pivot, start from scratch, and then continue to iterate as we go. We were trying to market Corona beer in a pandemic named the coronavirus. So agility was key. I think that kind of like accelerated us trying to think differently. And again, Constellation as a company is all about learning and growing. And so, it's not a hard sell by any means.
Yeah. And I may be a little bit biased coming from Tripadvisor and the travel category, but I thought one of the examples that you and I talked about was great, of just how to take advantage and be mindful of the timing that you're seeing happening, the trends that you're seeing happening, and then be a vocal force internally to let people know, like, this is a moment that we need to take advantage of. If you could take everyone through that one. And I think I also loved it because, like you said, during the pandemic, during the last 3 years, I'll speak from my own experience that travel was challenging. But we've seen a huge turn in the other direction, and especially for your brand, embracing that.
Yeah, for sure. So it's obviously a cross-functional effort, but it's still one that our teams here really love. So kind of building off that concept of, being really agile and being able to capitalize in real time on trends. And we were still getting back on our feet post COVID pause, all of that. So, we're always looking for ways to showcase that relevancy and timeliness together, is really what that sweet spot is. So the summer of 2021, as you said, like travel, it had gone away and it was sort of returning at this time somewhat back to normal. But what we saw was people were just itching to go somewhere, anywhere at this point. And also during that time, it was like the meteoric rise of cryptocurrency in the news and in pop culture. I think it was like right around the time Kim Kardashian and Snoop Dogg all talked about it within 1 week, which is, peak pop culture. So, Corona's a brand that's like the master about chilling on a beach, and we had a relationship with Snoop. So we knew there was something there. So we went to work and pulled together a last minute campaign with Expedia. Sorry. Giving away.
We'll chat later.
Yeah. Okay. We did a sweep where we gave away $1 million in a term that we coined cryptocurrency. So that was just a really fun kind of play on words as well, but that translated to 400 people getting about $2,500 in travel credit. So we obviously leaned on Snoop to be kind of the voice of that campaign, and we did PR, TV, everything. Like, it was just a really fun kind of blast for about a week, and it was honestly one of the biggest and most engaged programs we had that year. And not only that, like, just people talking about our brand spiked, the sentiment spiked, like everything that you want to see from a campaign really paid off. So that was a fun one for us.
No, it's awesome. Obviously, I mean, I know so many people, there's so much data around it, but it's like palpable when you're talking to people about like the desire to travel again. Yeah. But even back in 2021, to kind of be ahead, I think, of that curve and to see that type of results, and not that it isn't always on, but as a spot moment that you're identifying, so important. And speaking of some of the trends that we're seeing, I mentioned it before, but there's a lot of, obviously, we're seeing in the news coverage, consumption coverage of the rise of like non-alcoholic beverages. So, I think I read in Forbes that non-alcoholic drink markets have, passed over $10 billion, $11 billion. So significantly up. So curious about your POV in addressing it as a marketer.
Yeah, I mean, research backs it up, but I also believe this too. Like, to me, it's that next big category boom. And to brag about Constellation a little bit, like, we have such a strong, talented innovation team here at Constellation. And so they're always like really good at identifying that next to market opportunity and jumping on it. And so to that point, we are launching a Corona non-alcoholic in March of this year, which is really exciting. But obviously the numbers you mentioned are really big, but if you look at kind of beer specifically, it's still a small part of overall sales as a category, but it's definitely growing. The drinking occasion and behavior is growing. It's a brand new one that we're all able to lean into. So lots of room to grow here. And, for Corona, within the sub-branded families, we've got a lot, right, to focus on and support. So for non-alc, we're just kind of we're using it as an opportunity to lean back into what I was saying about testing and learning. So different approach, a little bit of different approach to strategy, but going out of the gate first by leaning heavily on like influencers and content creators and sampling and this really kind of grassroots effort, so that we can kind of learn who that core consumer is and continue to build and grow from there before we go all in on a media mix. But and lucky us, we have a very iconic brand that kind of helps us on the shelves when people will see it. So it's definitely a category we have our eyes on. That's
great. Well, I'll keep a lookout. March is very soon. I can't even believe how quickly the year feels to be flying already. And I know we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to circle back to some of the topics that we talked about in the beginning, which is really around, you talked a bit about your team structure and how you as a marketing team are pretty much all women. And I want to leave a few minutes for questions if anybody has as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you support each other to push forward these initiatives when, maybe you're trying to break down barriers, and then just a little bit more about how that dynamic works and the dynamic that you foster for your team that you're managing and cultivating, and the voice that you want them to be able to have.
Yeah, for sure. So it is, I gotta say, really fun. And I don't know if everyone would think this is, not what they're expecting, but like across media and brand, the Corona team is majority women. And it's just a fun, like, bond we have and thing that we can talk about. And so that's obviously been great. But me specifically, like my team, I manage a team of 4 with 2 direct reports. All of us are women. And with my 2 direct reports, like I think we just have been able to build like a really unique bond right now that's proven successful in a lot of different ways. But I think one thing about it is that we are just like, we understand each other intuitively in a way that I think is special when you have a team of women. And we have a lot of fun every day. But I think the biggest thing is that there's just a level of like transparency, honesty, and like grace that we give each other that I haven't experienced sometimes in the past. And I think that like sometimes women, it's hard to talk about unless you're at a women in marketing event or unless you're kind of, I don't know, an event session or something. But I think, daily we're really open about the things that we struggle with and honest about things. And, I've shared with them things I've been through and what I learned from it. Like I've been told to smile more. I actually got in trouble once for not smiling. And
this made me so angry the other day when we were talking about it.
It still bothers me. But like my work never suffered. I was still putting in like all of the hours that I ever did. But, it was just a time in my life where I literally couldn't smile. Like it took too much of my energy. And, I've learned a lot from that about like how to show up and when it's okay and when it's not, so lots there to unpack. But, I also going through the entertainment industry, there's like this coat of armor sometimes I had to put on going into meetings with certain filmmakers, or like I just knew inappropriate comments would come my way. And I think like as women, there's just this extra layer of like preparedness sometimes you have to have, or like honestly like a blank face you have to put up in order to get through it. And again, I say all this not to like complain by any means, but it's more just, I can talk about this with my team and then help them, learn if this happens to you, here's how you can address it, or here's how you can kind of turn that into a positive thing. And those lessons that I've translated are really about like, as women, you go through shit. And so I think like, honestly, we've really earned this right to be our own advocate, be our internal and own PR hype person, and really feel comfortable like broadcasting your accomplishments, talk about your career wins. And the biggest thing that it boils down to, and everything you learn from these moments where you feel like less than or feel like you were kind of, disappearing in the room you're in, I think is whatever organization you're in, like find your voice and then use it with confidence. And I've made it part of like their individual goals to either like present more or talk at least once in every cross-functional meeting. Obviously, like don't talk just to talk. And then like really be proactive with getting your ideas out there. And, someone gave me this advice and I also stick with it. Like your goal should be for people to bring your name up in a room and be an advocate for you when you're not there. And I think that just shows that you have that voice that people trust and respond to. So that's kind of things that we're able to talk about that I think is a little bit more of a safer space when you've got a team of women.
Yeah, I think that transparency piece is so key, and just being able to share. And even you and I started doing it the other day, and it's like, it happened. You're not alone. And I think that's so much about these women in marketing panels are about, and being able to create the connectivity there. So I know we're nearing the end. So if you had to leave us with, I think you've given a lot of really good, tangible advice, but if you had to just do one thing, one closer as you're leaving today about a piece of advice looking for women to be a leader in the industry, what would it be?
Oh, one is always so hard.
Well, you've given a lot smattered throughout this, but just one more.
Yeah, of course. No, I think one like short and sweet is like, don't ask for a seat at the table, just take it. And I think that can be a actual table in a room you're in, or that can be a metaphorical table, whatever it is. I think just take it and don't apologize for it. As long as you've got that confidence and you can, back it up, that's okay. Like you shouldn't, I don't know. I think sometimes we're also afraid to just like not overstep or like worry too much about politics. And obviously you've got to keep that in mind and keep your company ethos in mind. But like if you find yourself having to kind of apologize or shrink yourself back or stop your voice, then that maybe means you're at the wrong company. And I think that's kind of how I've sort of navigated my career. And honestly, it's the thing that's helped me the most.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great. And I appreciate the candor throughout, this entire session. I think it's been a really interesting mix of understanding, the business behind it and the strategies, as well as really understanding like, our own personal ways to be empowered. So I hope everyone feels empowered. I hope everyone is now like me in the mood for a beer. But I did want to leave it open for the last few minutes for any questions for anybody. Let's see if anything will pop up. Okay. We'll give it, we can give it a month. I can also just talk to you continuously.
Yep.
How quickly 40 minutes have just gone by.
So fun. I know, that went fast.
I know. But yeah, this has been incredible. So I will give, I think we're pretty much at time.
Someone dropped a question.
There you go. Oh.
What am I most excited for? I guess personally, I have a lot of fun travel coming up. Part of that work-life balance. Travel is a huge passion of mine, so I try to get a few big trips in every year. And then I think professionally, just continuing to work on this brand and evolve the business. And we have so many fun campaigns coming up that I can't really talk about right now, but it's just a lot of new stuff and a lot of new audiences, and it's a really exciting space to be in right now. So. And then, where do I see myself in 5 years? I hate this question.
The biggie.
Yeah, honestly, I just, I obviously have career goals of continuing to grow both my skill set, raise the ranks in marketing, all of those things. But I think truly it's just continuing to not only live my voice and kind of be confident in that and continue to grow that confidence, but also kind of help others. I think I love kind of this role of mentorship and kind of being a part of the industry and having talks like this. So I think that's also another kind of professional goal of mine, is to kind of expand that industry networking and connections.
It is a hard question, the 5 years, but I think that's, and something that's evolving throughout time. And I think where I love that you just focused it is really about you, not exactly a title or a role or a company. And I think that's the way it's traditionally, sometimes people look at it, and to look a little bit more inward, which is a great role model already.
Someone here gave me, I know we're at time. Someone here, a woman here gave really great advice, and she said, I've heard it a couple of times, but she said, chase experiences, not roles. And I think that to me was that's exactly, unknowingly, that's what I was doing, but that is absolutely what I would say has also been a huge driver of my career journey. If I wanted to be a VP by 30 in title alone, I probably would be at a company I don't love and a job I don't love. So it's fine to have those goals too, but I think for me, it's all about the experiences and the people and brands that you work on.
Yeah. What are you prioritizing and why? And I think that's such great advice. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great, fun session, informative, empowering. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you to those who have attended and participated today.
Yes, thank you.